In December of 1945, in Upper Egypt, an Arab peasant was digging in the desert. He had made an astonishing discovery. His shovel struck a red earthenware jar. Excitedly, he brought up the jar. But afraid that there was an evil spirit inside, he decided not to break the jar. But after realizing, after a while, that gold might be inside, he smashed the earthen jar and found instead of gold something far more precious and valuable. 13 papyrus scrolls. These scrolls were the secret writings of Jesus the Christ, the secret gospel according to Thomas. These gospels can open up a whole new world of insight into not only the teachings of Jesus, but into the secret teachings of the way of the Christ in all of us. On this special series of Aspires, we're going to look at these Gnostic Gospels, for they are profound in all areas. They offer to us an insight and a clarity into the Christ consciousness that has never been known before.
Ever since the dawn of humankind, we've sought the origins of our life and its purpose. Some have chosen to look to science, religion, or philosophy for answers. Many have turned to the great masters such as Lao Tzu, the Buddha, and Jesus Christ for spiritual illumination. Still others have sought truth through their own direct experience. All of us are searching, knowingly or unknowingly, for enlightenment, truth, and harmony in our lives. This program, hosted by Dr. Gregory Penn, will help you aspire to a more fulfilling and rewarding life.
Every day we take a step, we understand. The closer that we get, we'll find in who we are. We choose between the left and right, the ups and downs, the darkness or the light.
Here we are in this particular program, and we thought, what a perfect place to do this, to illustrate the point that in a padded cell, interesting thing about us, we spend our whole life erecting walls. Walls that we think will protect us, walls that we think will insulate us from harm, when in truth, they insulate us from the most deepest and profound part of us, our spiritual side, our heart. Science has said to us that if you leave the average human being alone to himself for more than a week, that the tendencies of insanity start to arise. We go crazy. Why is that? Why is it that we cannot be really left alone with ourselves? And yet, every great spiritual master that has ever come to this planet to teach us the way has said to us that we must be left alone to find our deep, more profound inner self. It's interesting to me, the walls that we put up, the way we look at life. We spend a whole life trying to learn, to gain, to have power in the form of knowledge, in the form of trying to have an intellectual insight into life, and it may work real well for us out in the world. I'm sure in the marketplace that is fine. But there are very few people who can go from the marketplace to the heart and find the real reason for life. Jesus was not a marketplace type of person. Buddha was not. Lao Tzu was not. And as we go deep into the book of Thomas, we get to see another type of Jesus. He was not filled with scriptures. He was not filled with religious ideas. He had something far different. He had that emptiness and that breath of spirit. That emptiness and that breath of spirit was very important. Nicodemus came to him, if you remember the Gospels. And it's an interesting story. Nicodemus comes to him, and Nicodemus is a scholar. He has much knowledge built in his head, a lot of walls around him. But he sees that there's something different in a Jesus. And he says to Jesus, "We know that you are a great master, for no one can do the things that you do unless," and Jesus interrupts him, and he just says, "You must be born again." And Nicodemus, using his intellect and only listening to what Jesus had to say from his knowledge, from his walls, says, "Do you mean that I must go into my mother's womb for a second time?" Of course, that's not what he meant. But you see, when one is bound by the walls of life around us, we can't see what's really going on. We can't really hear what's really being said. We can't really see the truth behind anything. Jesus in the book of Thomas is a different kind of Jesus. He's not filled with intellect or knowledge. He's a much different Jesus than the one we have portrayed him to be. He says to us, "He who knows the all, but does not know himself, misses everything." When Jesus said about knowing the all, he was talking just about this point of view that we have right here, allowing our mind to create such illusions of thinking that we know it all. There's an interesting thing about people who really come into the work. In the beginning of our life, we think that we know it all. We have a lot of knowledge, maybe knowledge about our work, our business, our friends, even some pseudo-knowledge about who we think we are. And then something very interesting begins to happen. Challenges and life start to come together a little bit, and all of the knowledge that we have doesn't seem to be enough to save us, so to speak. That's what Jesus was saying to us. He who knows the all, but does not know himself, misses everything. You could know a lot about your world, and that is wonderful. There's nothing wrong with that. You should know a lot about your work, your business. There's nothing wrong with that. But when it comes time to know the great inner dimensions, to know God, to know the potential of yourself, the things in the outside world aren't going to be able to help you. People who come to me for metaphysical training or some sort of spirituality, they come to me and they say to me, in my metaphysical growth, in my metaphysical training, I am growing. There is no growing in this work. Growing alludes to the idea that they've read certain books, listened to certain tapes, had certain teachers, that their intellect is growing. The real truth of the matter is you don't grow in this work. The real truth of the matter is you evolve, and you evolve through some revelation, and you evolve through some inspiration. The real evolvement of the work is when we are daring enough to put aside all the things that we have learned, all those judgments that we have made in the world. I want to give you a little secret. It's not one that many people will tell you about, but it is a true one. When it comes to spirituality, when it comes to truly knowing yourself, all the rules that you have learned in the outside world and all of that knowledge doesn't count one iota. You have to begin to start all over again. That's why Jesus said to Nicodemus, you had to be born again. In other words, you have to start all over again. It's a new process, it's a new life, it's a new work. But most of us are not humble enough to really do that. Most of us think that we can take what we've learned here in the walls that we have erected and apply it to our inner self, and it won't work. It never has, it never will. There is a person, a type of person that makes a good disciple. Not a disciple of me or anyone else, but a disciple of the Buddha nature, of Christ, of the universe. They are an individual who is willing to put aside all of the walls that they have built and tear them down and start all over again. Now the question really is, not can you understand what a Jesus would say or a Buddha would say, but can you understand one major point in your life? Can you understand that all of the walls that you have erected and all of the knowledge that you are so filled with, that you feel so prideful about, have to be dropped? Are you willing to do that? This was the great quest in my own life. I had to be willing. I could see this, to put down everything that I believed in and everything that I thought was knowledgeable and right and logical, to follow the deeper way of my heart. That's a question we all have to ask ourselves. It becomes very important at this point in our life to understand that just because a person has a great deal of knowledge, of intellectual knowledge stored up here, sutras, Bible scriptures, teachings of people that we admire or love doesn't mean that that has any meaning to us. Our search for meaning really is quite profound. Our search for meaning, though, has stopped here, and this is why we live in such a narrow mind. We find that many people are stuck in certain concepts because they can't broaden them to find the meaning in here. You'll never find the meaning of a scripture, a Jesus, up here. The meaning of Jesus is found within us. We have to broaden our point of view about that. I want to give you a teaching, an ultimate teaching that Jesus gave to us in this tiny little sutra. It is not a concept that can be memorized or theorized in the mind. The concept goes beyond that. It is, you are the all. There's been so many books and things written about the teachings. One can become very saturated with it. You can read them all. What good are they going to do until we take those teachings that we've read and heard and put them into some sort of way of life in ourselves? Jesus wasn't here to teach scripture, to have Sunday school and Bible hour. He came to teach us the way of our heart, to teach us and to help us understand the all in us, and then to incorporate that into our life. What more could I say? Jesus said it all. Buddha said it all. Lao Tzu said it all. They all have. What more can we read? What more can we study? All that's left to do is take what they've given to us and incorporate it as a way of life. That takes more than just mind. And you see, that's the problem. The mind resists that. The mind says, no, don't do that. We've already done that. We've erected these walls, these beliefs, these attitudes that we have. We've erected them. They're good enough. They'll help us, but they don't. In the bottom line of life, they aren't the way of life because life has no walls around it. Life is a very open experience. If you are feeling like I think a lot of people are, kind of caged in by their attitudes, their thoughts, their beliefs, maybe even their religion, maybe it's time that we learn to break free from that. Maybe it's time we learn to let that go. The person who knows the all but doesn't know himself misses everything. Jesus wasn't teaching about a hereafter. He wasn't teaching about what it means to be a good person. He wasn't teaching any of that. He was teaching us about ourselves, and we missed it. We never paid attention. All Jesus was saying when he said the kingdom of heaven lives within you, or the all lives within you, is that God lives within you. But we'll never be able to really know that as long as we have these kind of walls that we live by in our head, in our emotions, in our thoughts. I want to offer to you, when we come back, some controversial ideas on how to let go of these walls. They're controversial because the head will resist them, and many people would say that they might be a little dangerous in the sense that you give up so much of the things that you've held on to, but I think they're worth it. I think they'll make a definite difference in your life. So when we come back, I'd like to help you break down the walls, the barrier to your mind. Now let's go into how we do this. It's one thing to hear about all of this, isn't it? It's another thing to do it. There are three things that are necessary if we're going to find our way out of this mess that we've got ourselves into, this padded cell. The first way is through courage, the second is through consistency, and the last is through something that I call forgiveness, but we'll get into that. Let's look at the courage for a moment. Courage. The courage to look inside of ourselves and to see the things that we don't really want to see. That's the first thing that has to happen. When you start moving towards your heart and less from your head, you're going to begin to see some resistance. The resistance may be of motives, and that's a major thing. The most courageous thing that a person goes through is to look at their motives. Their motives for doing anything, your motives for loving people, your motives for helping people, your motives for doing anything that you do. And I think one of the first things that we see about ourselves that we don't always like is that a lot of the motives that we have done and worked with have been motives of, well, self-grandizement, egotism. It's okay, don't beat yourself for it. That's the courage. The courage is not to hurt yourself. The courage is to understand yourself and not to blame yourself and be hard. You know, a lot of people who are intellectual, in fact, most people I know who are very hard people on themselves because intellect is hard. It causes us to feel a sense of, well, betrayal of ourselves because deep down inside we know that living by our head is not the way. So work with me on this. Have the courage to go deeper than what your mind would tell you was right and wrong, good and bad. Real courage is not the judgment that we lay on ourselves or other people. If you look at the teachings of Jesus in the book of Thomas as well as in the Gospels, he hammers home the whole idea of judge not. Because if we do not judge ourselves, if we do not look at ourselves and call ourselves bad for the mistakes that we make and the misunderstandings that we have, we develop the path to the heart. You're going to find this. It's going to happen to you. It's happened to me, and I think it's happened to many people who watch this program. And that is, there comes a point in our life where we can't live by our head anymore. We can't live by our intellect. We just can't do it one more minute. That moment is so important. It is the courage to look inside of our heart. It is the courage to focus away from what has been said and what has been taught and what has been read to what is. Where are you with that right now? Are you at the point where you're willing to look inside of yourself and maybe see the things that need to be changed, to be understood without condemning and hurting yourself? Only then are you fit, as Jesus said, for the kingdom of heaven. For there you know everything, and you have not missed everything. You know it and you work with it. Courage. The courage to go to your heart when your head would say, no, it's illogical, it's irrational, it may be wrong, it may not be like everybody else. But if you have the courage of your heart, you'll always find a way to find peace in your life. It's a major point. Courage. The next is consistency. Most of us are not practiced in consistency. We think of consistency as the repetition of what our mind tells us to do. We have all practiced the mental consistency of trying to affirm something in our mind over and over and over again, but that's not the consistency that I would like to relate to you. That kind of mind repetition builds walls like this and makes it impossible for us to have any kind of spiritual attainment. No, the consistency that I want to work with is a revolution. It's a revolution where we move against our minds, where we do not allow our minds with its reasoning and its past and its logic to govern the way we're going to live our life. This is a real revolution that causes a revelation in us. And that is that there's something beyond these walls. There's something beyond them if we will just listen. Our minds have become so skeptical and so cynical, so analytical. It's impossible for us to be consistent with our heart. As you make the trek from your head to your heart in trust and then in the level of our love, you're going to find that consistency is really very important. The consistency to move with ourselves in a way in which not only the heart directs, but maybe in total opposition to everything that you've been taught, that you have read, that you have heard, or that you've been told. That meshes with the courage we've just talked about. Courage and consistency. When you're consistent with your heart, the opportunities of life now begin to happen. When you're consistent with your heart, you'll begin to see that you have a new set of eyes, a pair of eyes to see things that you've missed before. You'll be able to look at people and you will never see them out of the habitual ideals and idealisms that your mind has caught on to. When you look at people, we often look at them from our prejudice and from our past, and therefore we miss them. But when we are consistent with our heart and moving against our mind's prejudice and our mind's anger and our mind's hostility, we have a new set of eyes, a new perception of life. A compassion rolls over us, a forgiveness occurs in us. Love happens, and these walls suddenly start to tremble a little bit. We get closer and closer to the infinite within us. Can you be consistent? Consistency is the highest form of inner strength that a person can aspire to. To be consistent with your heart and the nature of your being when your mind is screaming at you saying, no, I don't want to forgive. No, I'd rather have revenge. No, I'd rather get even. No, I'd rather hurt someone, or no, I'd rather even hurt myself. It all depends on you. How much do you want to break down the padded cell that your mind has created for you? How willing are you within yourself to get beyond what your mind has set up as a limitation for you? I think a lot of us say that we want this spiritual work or this spiritual attainment a lot more than we're willing to really practice. It's not in how many churches you go to or how many books you read or how many tapes you listen to or even watching this program. It's how consistent you are in the flow of your heart and working with it. The third and most important step in all of this is to understand that as you begin to break down these walls, you're going to be making some mistakes in your life. Well, mistakes to your mind, that is. Maybe mistakes to what you've been taught. I've noticed that all of us in this world make mistakes. There isn't any of us who don't make mistakes. And that is the nature of us at this point. As we are making, again, that transition from head to heart, we're going to find some areas within us where we're in what I call no man's land. But mistakes are wonderful things if we begin to look at them deeply within ourselves. They are risks that we make, and we often find that a lot of our mistakes really aren't mistakes at all. They're just simply things that we are learning about ourselves. If we're all going to make mistakes, and God is a merciful God, then we need to understand something. You and I have the right to make as many mistakes as are necessary in our effort to find ourselves. Now that may sound like a lot more than your mind can accept, but nevertheless, it is a truth. We have the right to make as many mistakes as are necessary to find out who we are and what we are. Our mind has a great deal of difficulty with mistakes because our mind, being as limited as it is, caging us in as it does, creates barriers between our heart and ourself, and real forgiveness comes from our hearts. Let me give you a little definition of forgiveness as I have experienced it in my own life. Forgiveness is not just saying you're sorry. Forgiveness is not seeing the act as being cruel or harsh. Forgiveness is seeing the source from whence came the action. When we see the reason why we did what we did, not based on the attitude of trying to rationalize or realize in the human sense of the word, in the intellectual sense of the word, how to see where our mistakes come from, but when we deeply understand where they come from within us, that's when it's all forgiven. In that very moment, just like that, there is an ultimate forgiveness given to us, and we sense it. Now, can we accept it? In the acceptance of forgiveness, of our mistake, of anything that we've done that seems wrong, we find a release, and the release is the forgiveness itself. You and I can't live without forgiveness. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to be exploring ourselves. We're going to be saying and doing things that sometimes seem questionable. But as long as we continue with the flow inside of ourselves, as long as we continue to seek to understand the nature of our being, we'll always be forgiven. Believe it or not, and I don't mean to sound trite, God loves us, does not mean to hold anything against us for the mistakes that we have made, and will not, as long as we are making that effort inward, consciously, consistently, with courage. These walls don't stand a chance. They're going to eventually fall. With the consistency to our heart and the courage to stay there and the ability to forgive ourselves when we make mistakes, we put ourselves in a position to do something that very few human beings ever do. We put ourselves in a position to take these walls and allow them to crumble because they're nothing more than the illusions that our minds have created. Thank you. Namaste. Jesus said it to us here in the book of Thomas. If you know the all, but forget yourself, don't realize yourself, you've missed everything. Why should we waste this time? Life is for living. It is an experience of ourselves. Remember who you are. You're not here just to learn dogma and doctrine and sutras. All the great masters teach us one thing. Life begins, life originates, and life is a continuum from within ourselves. If we are willing to do some very beautiful work in ourselves, to work with courage, the courage to let love penetrate us, if we are willing to be consistent and forgiving, we can do some beautiful work and knock these walls down.
We choose between the left and right, the ups and downs, the darkness or